Dust settled on everything in Rain Aldrich's apartment. On the shelf above the kitchen. On the second chair nobody ever used. On the old cracked battle helmet sitting on the windowsill, where it had sat for 11 years without moving. Rain did not keep it because it was pretty. He kept it because throwing it away felt like a kind of lie. Like pretending the war had not happened, like pretending the 4 people who wore helmets just like it were not gone. So it stayed on the sill. The city moved outside the window. The helmet stayed still. He was 48 years old. He had a bad knee, a decent pension, and no particular reason to be anywhere early. He woke up each morning, made coffee, sat by the window, and watched the street below until he felt ready to be a person again. It usually took about 20 minutes. That morning it took longer because there was something in the helmet. He noticed it before he even poured the coffee. A small shape, curled tight, tucked into the bowl of the visor like it had always belonged there. At first he thought it was a piece of cloth that had blown in through the cracked window frame. Then the cloth breathed. Rain stood very still. The thing inside the helmet was the size of a large cat, maybe smaller. It had scales, gold and violet, layered like feathers, and a tail that curled twice around the visor's edge before ending in a small flat point. 2 tiny folded wings pressed flat against its back. Its eyes were closed. Its chest rose and fell in a slow, even rhythm. It was a Dravery hatchling, a baby dragon, in the plainest possible terms, sleeping in his helmet on his windowsill in his apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that had no obvious way in except the small gap in the window frame, which Rain now noticed was slightly wider than he remembered. He stood there for a while. Then he went and made his coffee. He brought it back to the window and sat in the chair 3 feet away and drank it slowly while the hatchling slept. He did not call anyone. He did not reach for his comm unit. He did not try to touch it or move it or figure out what to do. He just sat, the way he had learned to sit in the field, patient, quiet, doing nothing that could make a bad situation worse. When the hatchling woke up, it happened fast. The amber eyes opened, both at once, sharp and clear. The small head lifted. It looked directly at Rain with the total, unashamed focus that only very young creatures and very old soldiers ever manage. Rain raised his coffee cup slightly, the way a person nods. The hatchling blinked. Then it yawned. A tiny, enormous yawn that showed 2 rows of very small, very sharp teeth, and exhaled a single pale puff of smoke that drifted up and dissolved against the ceiling. Then it lowered its head back onto the visor's edge and closed its eyes again. Rain finished his coffee. Later that afternoon, he went to the market at the end of the block and bought cured meat strips, the kind sold for humans, but also eaten by the Dravery, who lived in the lower quarter of Cauldron. He did not know what hatchlings ate. He guessed it was something like what adults ate, only smaller. He put 3 strips on a plate and set it on the windowsill beside the helmet. By the time he came back from his evening walk, the plate was empty and the hatchling was asleep again. This continued for 4 days. On the 5th day, his neighbor brought, a wide man who kept birds and knew too much about everything, knocked on the door and saw the hatchling on the sill and went pale. Rain, he said slowly. Do you know what that is? Dravery hatchling, Rain said. Do you know what it means that it's sleeping there? In that specific thing? Rain said he did not. Bront explained, in the halting way of someone recalling something read long ago, that Dravery hatchlings separated from their clutch mother would search for a safe, enclosed space to imprint on. It was instinct. Once they chose a nest, the choice was binding. In Dravery culture, almost sacred. The nest became the hatchling's first sworn home. And the helmet smells like you, Braun added. Like a person who survived a long time in dangerous places. To a hatchling, that smells like safety. Rain looked at the small gold and violet creature sleeping in his cracked, worn-out, 11-year-old helmet. He thought about the 4 people he had served with. He thought about how the helmet still smelled, to him, like metal and old sweat, and the particular cold of the border conflict's second winter. Apparently, it smelled like something else entirely to her. He went back inside. He left the window cracked. She was there the next morning, curled in the helmet, tail wrapped around the visor, fast asleep. He made coffee. He sat down. He watched her breathe. Outside, the city of Cauldron moved through its morning in the ordinary way, trams and voices and the distant sound of the Memorial Plaza bells marking the hour. Nothing felt different from any other day. But something had shifted, quietly, the way important things sometimes do, without announcement, without drama, without any sound at all. 3 weeks after the hatchling arrived, a protest broke out in front of the Cauldron City Hall. Rain watched it from the tram on his way back from the Veterans Clinic. Around 200 Dravery, most of them older, carrying ceremonial banners and speaking in the low resonant tones their language used for formal grievance. Their signs, translated in the news feed crawl along the tram window, said things like sacred ground cannot be shared and the memorial belongs to the fallen, not to colonists. Elder Tarvin's name appeared in every third broadcast segment. He was old, even by Dravery standards, scales gone pale at the edges, eyes the color of deep water, and he had spent 40 years in the council arguing that humans had been given too much access to Dravery sacred sites when the border conflict ended. The Joint War Memorial Plaza had always been his particular frustration. He had not built it. He had not agreed to it. He had simply been outvoted, and he had never forgotten that. Now he had enough votes to try again. Rain got off the tram and walked home and did not think about any of it for the rest of the evening. The hatchling had grown slightly, still small enough to carry in 2 hands, but heavier and more awake. She spent more time watching him now than sleeping. She tracked his movements around the apartment with those amber eyes, when he cooked, when he read, when he sat at the window. She had started mimicking small things. When he raised his hand to scratch his jaw, she raised one small claw to her own jaw a moment later and tilted her head. He had not named her. He kept telling himself she was not his to name. He fixed the window frame properly, so the gap was the right size, not too wide to let in the cold, not too narrow for her to pass through. He put a shallow bowl of water on the sill. He learned that she did not like the smell of the synthetic cleaning spray he used on the floors and switched to a different kind. He did not examine why he was doing any of this. He just did it. On a gray afternoon 12 days into the second month, someone knocked hard on his door. 2 Dravery guards stood in the hallway, tall, armored in the light ceremonial plate that officials used for formal visits. Between them stood a Dravery female of middle age, her scales a deep bronze, her bearing the kind that came from years of being listened to. Beside her, a small human in a translator's gray vest. "This is Clutch Mother Dale," the translator said. "She is the guardian of the hatchling you have been housing. She requests entry." Rain stepped aside. Dale walked in and stopped. Through the window behind Rain, in the afternoon light, the hatchling was visible on the sill, curled in the old helmet, one small claw hooked over the visor's broken edge, asleep and completely at peace. Dale did not speak for a long moment. Rain did not fill the silence. He had learned in the war that silence, given enough space, usually said the important thing on its own. When Dale spoke, the translator rendered it quietly. "How long has she been here?" "About 7 weeks, Rain said. "You did not report her?" "No." "Why?" Rain thought about it honestly. She wasn't doing any harm. She was sleeping. Dale looked at him. Her eyes were a darker amber than the hatchling's, older, more complicated. She looked at the helmet for another long moment, then at the water bowl on the sill, at the clean space around it, at the way the window frame had been carefully maintained. "You adjusted the frame," she said, "so she could come and go." Another silence. "You understand," the translator said, on Dale's behalf now speaking in a slower, more careful register, "that in our tradition, a hatchling's first chosen nest carries legal and spiritual weight. It cannot simply be removed." "Bront told me something about that," Rain said. "My neighbor. If we take her from that object now, without ceremony, we cause harm to her bonding instincts. The damage is not always visible, but it is real." Rain nodded. "So what do you need from me?" Dale looked at him for a long time. Whatever she was trying to read in his face, she seemed to find either what she expected or something she had not expected at all. It was hard to tell which. "Nothing yet," the translator finally said. "We will return." The guards moved to go. Dale paused at the door and looked back once more at the hatchling in the helmet, sleeping in the slanted afternoon light. She said something brief in Dravery. The translator hesitated, then rendered it simply. She chose well. Then they were gone. Rain closed the door. He went and sat in his chair. The hatchling slept on. Outside, the city hummed and moved, and somewhere across the Plaza District, Elder Tarvin was addressing a council session about the future of the memorial, and none of it had reached this quiet room yet. but the smoke was already rising, just too slow and too distant for most people to smell it. Rain had spent enough time in burning places to know that did not mean it was not coming. The smell reached him before the sirens did. Rain had grown up near a paper factory. He knew the difference between smoke that meant someone left something on the stove and smoke that meant something structural was going wrong. This was the second kind, thick, chemical, with the particular bitterness of treated stone being eaten by accelerant fire. He was already putting on his jacket when the first alarm sounded across the Plaza district. Outside, people were moving fast in the direction of the Memorial Plaza or fast away from it, depending on what kind of person they were. Rain moved toward it at a steady walking pace. Not slow, not running. The border conflict had taught him that a running figure causes the people around them to run too, and running crowds make bad decisions. He walked like he knew where he was going, and like whatever was there could wait the 30 seconds it would take him to arrive with his head clear. The plaza came into view around the corner of Dravet Street. The Dravery wing of the War Memorial was burning. Not the whole structure. The central hall and the human wing were intact, but the Dravery Ceremonial Gallery, where 40 years of carved names covered 3 walls of pale stone, was engulfed. Fire suppression foam coated the perimeter in uneven patches, which meant the system had partially fired. Partially, not fully. The cordon was already up. City firefighters and Warden Hess Oben's plaza security team worked the edges. Rain stopped at the cordon tape and looked. He did not look at the fire. He looked at the suppression system housing panel on the near pillar, the one that would have triggered the full gallery response. It was sealed now, the way investigators seal things. But the housing edge was wrong. The access plate sat at a fractional angle that meant it had been opened and closed again in a hurry, not by the system's automated cycle. He had spent 6 years installing those panels on military and civic installations across 3 planets. He knew exactly how the access plate sat when the system ran its normal cycle. It did not sit like that. Someone had opened it manually. He took out his comm unit and photographed it from outside the cordon, angling for the edge detail. Then he looked at the scorch marks on the floor around the panel base. Then he looked at the override tool marks on the plate housing. Dravery grip claw marks. Not human hand marks. The spacing and depth were wrong for human fingers, and the angle of pressure was wrong for any standard human tool. Rain put his comm unit away. He stood at the cordon for another few minutes, watching the fire teams work, watching Hess Oben direct traffic on the secure channel with a tight jaw and the look of a man doing complex math in his head about how bad this was about to get. Rain knew the answer. It was going to get very bad. By evening, Elder Tarvin was on every broadcast channel. He did not shout. Tarvin had never needed to shout. He spoke in the measured cadence of someone who had rehearsed grief into a political instrument, and he said that the burning of the Dravery Memorial Gallery was the final evidence of human contempt for Dravery's sacred space. He said the joint administration of the plaza had failed. He said he would bring a motion to the council in 48 hours demanding full Dravery administrative control, and if denied, formal separation of the Cauldron settlement zones. The word separation, in the context of Cauldron's history, meant one thing. Everyone knew what it meant. Rain walked home through streets that were already quieter than they should have been, with a specific kind of quiet, the kind where people have gone inside not because it is late, but because outside feels uncertain. He climbed the stairs to his apartment. He opened the door. The hatchling was awake on the windowsill. She was not in the helmet. She was sitting upright beside it, her small wings half raised, her head turned toward the direction of the plaza. The faint smell of char still drifted on the night air. She made a sound he had not heard before, low and resonant, coming from somewhere deeper in her chest than her usual small chirps and huffs. It rose and fell in a pattern that was not random. Rain had read, somewhere, that Dravery hatchlings could sense the emotional resonance of sacred sites, that they keened a specific kind of grief sound when they perceived death in stone. The carved names in the gallery were the names of the Dravery dead from the border conflict. She could feel them, even through distance and smoke and glass. He sat down in his chair. He did not turn the news back on. He looked at the small gold and violet creature grieving for names she could not read in a language she did not know. And he thought about 48 hours, and what could be done in 48 hours, and whether any of it would be enough. The war he had survived once was knocking on a door again. And the person holding the evidence that could stop it was a retired engineer with a bad knee, sitting in a dark apartment, listening to a baby dragon mourn. Warden Hess Oben had not slept. It showed in the way he sat, upright but heavy, like a wall that had developed a small crack and was working very hard not to let it widen. Rain laid the photographs on the desk between them without preamble. Hess looked at them. He looked at Rain. He looked at the photographs again. "You took these from outside my cordon," he said. "Yes. That is technically a problem. Write me up later," Rain said. "Look at the plate edge." Hess looked at the plate edge in the photograph. His expression did not change, which meant it had changed internally in a significant way, and he was deciding how to process it. "The override marks," Rain said. "Look at the angle and depth. That is not a human tool. That is not a human hand. I installed 41 of those panels across 3 systems in 6 years. I know what a human grip does to that housing. This is a Dravery grip claw, probably right dominant, probably adult male based on the spread. If I take this to the investigative board," Hess said slowly, "and it reads the way you say it reads, it will not calm things down. It will change the target of the anger, but it will not remove the anger. I know. Tarvin's people will say we fabricated it. I know that too. So why are you bringing it to me?" Rain picked up one of the photographs and looked at it. "Because the alternative is doing nothing, and I already know what doing nothing costs. I watched it cost 4 people their lives in the first week of the border conflict because the right information went to nobody." Hess was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled the photographs toward him and picked up his comm unit. They worked through the night. Rain tracked the accelerant compound. It was not on the commercial market in Cauldron. Too specific, too expensive, a military-grade formulation used in controlled demolition of fortified structures. But it appeared in 3 Dravery military surplus manifests filed over the past decade, each one routed through a quartermaster station in the outer settlement zones. Hess cross-referenced the manifests against the access logs for the Plaza Suppression System's service records. Every licensed technician who had ever touched those panels was on file. One name appeared twice in the last 60 days, a maintenance access that should have been a routine check, logged under the credentials of a junior administrative aide attached to Elder Tarvin's council office. The aide's name was Farath, young, by Dravery standards, zealous, according to 3 separate personnel notes flagged and never escalated. He had written, in an internal memo 8 months prior, that Tarvin moved too slowly and that the only language the human settlers understood was consequence. Nobody had acted on the memo. It had been filed and left. Rain thought about all the memos that had been filed and left before the border conflict started. He did not say this out loud. It would not help anything. He acted alone, Hess said, at around 3 in the morning, staring at what they had assembled. Tarvin didn't know. He's using the fire, but he didn't light it. That matters, Rain said. Does it? To Tarvin's supporters? It might matter to Tarvin. Hess looked doubtful. Rain was not certain either, but he had seen enough of the Elders' broadcasts to understand that whatever Tarvin was, he was not a man who had built his entire identity on Dravery tradition only to quietly accept that one of his own people had committed a deliberate desecration and then let that desecration be used as a political weapon. Pride like Tarvin's had edges that cut in both directions. What Rain did not know was how to get that information in front of Tarvin in a way that would not simply be dismissed or destroyed before the council session. He did not solve that problem that night. What he did not know, sitting in Hess's office at 3 in the morning drinking bad coffee, was that the problem was solving itself 2 blocks away. Clutch Mother Dale had been outside his building again. She had been watching, on and off, for 2 weeks, not intrusively, not illegally, simply watching the way someone watches when they are trying to understand something that does not fit their existing categories. She had watched Rain put fresh water on the sill in the morning. She had watched him sit with the hatchling in the evenings without trying to handle her or restrain her. She had watched the hatchling fall asleep on his shoulder once, on a warm afternoon, and watched him sit very still for an hour rather than disturb her. That night, after the fire, she had watched him leave his building at a steady walk, not running, moving toward the burning memorial instead of away from it. She had watched him photograph the suppression panel housing. She had watched him walk to the warden's building. And she had asked, through a cultural scholar she contacted at midnight, Why a human would keep a broken helmet for 11 years when it served no practical function anymore. The scholar's answer stayed with her. She sat in her vehicle outside Hess Oben's building and thought about tradition, Dravery tradition, which said that objects carried the memory of what they had witnessed. That a thing kept by a person who had survived something terrible was not merely an object. It was a record. The humans had a different word for it. But the instinct, apparently, was the same. She had 42 hours to decide what she was going to do with that understanding. The council chamber of Cauldron held 300, and every seat was filled. Standing space at the back was packed 3 deep. Dravery elders in ceremonial scale plate, human settlement representatives in formal gray, journalists from 4 separate news networks, and 2 rows of plaza security officers under Hess Oben's command stationed along the side walls. Elder Tarvin sat at the head of the council table. He looked, Rain thought from the back of the room, like a mountain that had decided to have an opinion. Rain and Hess had been given 7 minutes on the formal agenda. A courtesy slot, the kind given to concerns that the chair intended to hear briefly and then set aside. They both knew this. They presented anyway, the photographs, the accelerant manifests, the access logs, Farath's credentials overlapping the suppression panel service records, the internal memo. Hess presented it cleanly and without drama, the way investigators were trained to. Tarvin listened. His expression did not change. When Hess finished, Tarvin said, in measured and courteous tones, that the evidence was interesting but that its origin, assembled overnight by a human security warden and a retired human soldier with no current investigative authority, made its reliability difficult to confirm. He said the council would review it in due course. He said that due course would occur after the motion was resolved. 3 of the council members nodded. The motion was going to pass. Anyone in the room with a working set of eyes could see it. Rain did not argue. He had known this was likely. He had said what needed to be said in the formal record. Then the side door opened. Clutch Motherdale walked into the chamber. She was not on the agenda. She had not requested a speaking slot. She walked in with the particular calm of someone who has decided to do something that cannot be undone and has made their peace with it, and she was carrying, held in both arms like a ceremonial offering bowl, an old cracked human battle helmet. Inside the helmet, curled into the visor, was Sora, fast asleep. The chamber went very quiet. Dale walked to the center of the floor. She did not ask for permission to speak. In Dravery Council tradition, a clutch mother addressing the body on a matter of hatchling welfare did not require permission. It was one of the oldest formal rights in their governance structure. Tarvin, who had built his career on that governance structure, could not procedurally stop her. She spoke in formal Dravery, the binding register, the one recorded in permanent council archive. Her voice was level and clear. The translation feed rendered it for the human representatives. I stand before this council to enter formal record of the following fact. A Dravery hatchling of my clutch, separated during the political evacuation of the lower quarter 11 weeks ago, located and chose a nesting site of her own will. The site she chose is the battle helmet of a human soldier, retired, resident of Cauldron's 3rd district. The hatchling has nested there for 11 weeks. She has not been coerced. She has not been confined. She has fed, grown, and thrived. Under Dravery bonding law, this choice is sacred and cannot be contested. She paused and looked directly at Tarvin. I do not bring this to make a political argument. I bring this because our law requires me to record it, and because I will not allow this council to make a decision about the character of human settlers in this city while a fact of this nature sits unrecorded. She set the helmet down on the council floor, gently, in the space between the presenting table and the council bench. Sora did not wake. 300 people looked at a baby dragon the size of a large cat, gold and violet, sleeping in a cracked and worn human battle helmet in the middle of the Cauldron Council chamber. Rain, at the back of the room, did not move. After a moment, Sora's amber eyes opened. She looked up at the high ceiling. She looked at the rows of faces. Her ears, small, flat, scaled, rotated once. She found Rain at the back of the room. Her eyes settled on him. He made a small sound. Low, the kind he made when she woke up on the windowsill. Nothing significant, just a sound that meant he was there. She put her head back down. She went asleep. The silence in the chamber lasted a long time. When Tarvin finally spoke, His voice was different. Not softer exactly. More careful. Like a man stepping onto ground he has not tested yet. Bring Farath, he said. It was not what anyone expected him to say. His aide was brought to the chamber within the hour. The evidence was laid before him directly, in Tarvin's presence. Farath lasted 6 minutes before he confessed. He said he had done it for the cause. He said Tarvin had been too patient for too long. He said someone had to act. Tarvin looked at the young aide for a long time after the confession. Nobody in the chamber spoke. Then Tarvin turned to the council, and he withdrew the motion. Not because the evidence had convinced him. The evidence alone might not have been enough. He might have found a way to doubt it, to delay it, to route around it through procedure. But there was a Dravery hatchling sleeping in a human's helmet in the middle of his council floor, and his entire political and cultural identity rested on the premise that Dravery tradition was real, that it meant something, that it was not simply a tool to be used when convenient. And the tradition was very clear on what it meant when a hatchling chose. For months after the council session, the War Memorial Plaza reopened. Both wings had been restored. The Dravery Gallery rebuilt stone by stone, the carved names recut by the same craftspeople who had done the original work. The fire damage was gone. The suppression systems had been replaced and upgraded, with a joint oversight panel that reported to both the Human Settlement Council and the Dravery administrative body. Farath's trial had concluded. Tarvin had spoken at the sentencing, not in defense of the aide, but to say formally and on permanent record that what Farath had done was a desecration, and that the Dravery people did not honor their dead through sabotage. That statement, more than the trial itself, had changed something in how the two communities spoke to each other in Cauldron. Not everything, not even most things, but something. The reopening ceremony was attended by roughly 4,000 people. There were speeches. There was ceremonial fire, the Dravery kind, controlled, blue-edged, lit by a clutch mother as a mark of consecration. There was a joint chorus of human and Dravery voices reading the names of the fallen aloud, one by one, in both languages. In the new central hall, the shared space between the two wings, which had always existed but had never quite felt shared before, a small alcove had been added. It was not large. A display case, well lit, with a short plaque in 2 languages. Inside the case, one cracked battle helmet. Gold and violet scale marks worn into the inner lining where a small creature had curled against it for months. Formally donated. Formally received. The human text on the plaque read, "She chose this. We chose to be worthy of it." Rain did not attend the ceremony. He watched it on a public screen from a bench on Dravette Street, 2 blocks from the plaza, with a flatbread in one hand and cold coffee in the other. Sora sat on his shoulder. She was considerably larger now, the size of a medium dog, her gold and violet scales brighter than they had been in winter, her wings developed enough that she spread them occasionally when something caught her interest, which currently was a pigeon sitting on the bench arm 3 feet away, regarding her with the profound indifference of a city bird that had seen everything. Sora watched the pigeon. The pigeon watched Sora. Neither moved. Rain ate his flatbread. He heard footsteps and did not turn around. He already knew the walk. He had learned it over several weeks of noticing it outside his building. Clutch Motherdale sat on the bench beside him without asking. She was not in formal dress. She looked, for once, like a person rather than a title. They watched the ceremony on the screen for a while. "You should be there," she said eventually. "I can see it from here. You donated the helmet." Anonymously. She looked at him. He looked at the screen. "The plaque was your wording," she said. Hess helped with the Dravery translation. Dale was quiet for a moment. On screen, the joint chorus had begun, human and Dravery voices together, the names rising and falling. Sora's ears rotated toward the sound. She made the low, resonant sound she had made the night of the fire, but softer now. Not grief exactly. Something older and less sharp. "Why did you keep the helmet?" Dale asked. The original reason. Before any of this. Rain thought about how to say it simply. "4 people I served with died in the border conflict," he said. "They wore helmets like that one. I came home, and they did not. It seemed wrong to throw it away. Like I would be saying their dying was a thing to move past." Dale considered this. "We have a word," she said slowly, in Dravery, then repeated it. "It means an object that carries the weight of the dead so that the living do not have to carry it entirely alone." Rain did not try to repeat the word. He was not good at Dravery phonemes, and he knew it. He just nodded. That is what the helmet was, Dale said. For you, before it was anything else. Yeah, he said. I suppose it was. On his shoulder, Sora huffed a small smoke ring. It drifted out into the afternoon air above Dravette Street and came apart in the light breeze coming off the plaza. The pigeon on the bench arm watched the smoke ring. Then it flew away, apparently having decided it had better things to do. Sora watched it go with great dignity. Rain finished his coffee. Somewhere beyond the screen, in the new central hall of the War Memorial Plaza, 4,000 people stood in a shared space that had almost not existed anymore, saying the names of the dead in 2 languages, and the names sounded different together than they did apart. Fuller, somehow, like a sentence that had been missing half its words and had finally found them. Rain did not see any of it directly. He had been in enough places where people died to know that the ceremony was never really the point. The point was the 48 hours before the ceremony, the hours when it could have gone the other way and did not. The point was a small gold and violet creature that had crawled through a cracked window frame and gone to sleep in the safest thing she could find. The point was that she had been right too. And somewhere in the records of the Cauldron Accord, filed in the Joint Archive, a xenoanthropologist's note read, "Humans do not discard objects that were faithful to them. This appears to extend, under the right conditions, to beings that were not originally theirs at all." The report was eventually read by scholars across 4 species. It changed very few opinions directly, and very quietly, in the way that only true things can. It changed everything.